don't you dare let a business dictate your creative worth to you. It is not for a marketplace to determine how valid your contribution is. You have value, and whether or not it's a capital value or not doesn't determine whether or not you actually have value. And so I think that's really hard to remember when you're getting rejections. I mean, when I first had an agent, I went for a year and a half of auditions, never got a call back. Got these calls from like some casting agent, called we had a general meeting, just like this, we were just shooting the shit. Called my agent, was like, I don't get it. He's charmless, all this stuff. You know, you just get these things and you just start to think like, maybe I'm not good. And it may be that you won't make a living. It may be that there's financial hardship. Those things may be real, but what is not real is those people don't get to tell you how valid you are as someone who is curious and creative and passionate.
Filmmaker Magazine presents Back to One with Peter Rinaldi.
Zach Woods is an actor. He sat down with me in New York City to talk about the work.
I remember when I first saw you, and I know that this is going to sound like I'm making this up, but I remember where I was watching In the Loop. I remember when you came on the screen. It was in that Klumsky scene, right? Is that the first time scene in the movie?
That's amazing.
Yeah. And I remember thinking, who is this guy? What was it about that made me think you were special? That made me think that that I wanted to like see more of that kind of, what was it? Delivery, comedy, a mannerism of it. I don't know what it was. And then I'm thinking, I was trying to analyze it, watching it again. Having seen you now and all these other things. And I think it was, you weren't winking at me, you know, like saying like, I'm playing this character. You were playing the reality of it.
Oh man, that's such a nice thing to say.
No, and I wanted to know if this is something
you.
that you think about, because that to me is, when I really analyze it, it's like there are times when I chuckle or smile at comedy, and a lot of times it's people that I like, and it's from other things, and they're being fine in this, but it's almost like I'm smiling or laughing kind of at the shadow of the joke, meaning like they're not playing the reality, when they're playing the writing, or when you can tell that they know that this is witty, so they're kind of playing that. I could still kind of laugh or kind of enjoy it, and I think this is what people do. We kind of enjoy it, but it's almost like we're enjoying like Plato's
the cave
thing.
Right?
You know what I mean? Like it's almost like we're seeing that. We're laughing at what the joke could be. I know it's not if they were playing the reality of it. It's almost like...
Oh, wow. I mean, it's a very sweet thing to say.
I really think you're just not playing the joke.
That's honestly my dream compliment. You're making my day, because I guess I always thought... It's funny you mentioned In the Loop, because I always thought like Sopranos was one of the funniest shows on television.
Especially the first season, yes.
Because for the reasons that you're describing, I often think dramas sometimes can be funnier, weirdly, than comedies, because just human behavior honestly captured or exhibited or whatever is so idiosyncratic and strange and funnier than anything that you could sort of concoct with your sort of conscious mind. And so I feel like, you know, like James Gandolfini, someone I always thought was like so funny just by virtue of his commitment.
Yes.
And I guess I also feel like you can kind of be a bully to the characters you play. You know what I mean? You can be unkind to the people you play by making fun of them.
Yes.
And I guess it's so funny because in a literal sense, they're not real people. So, you know, but even as I was saying that just now, like, oh, you can bully the characters, it made me feel upset, because it's like you're the only, I mean, this is almost a cliche, but you're the only person on earth who is entrusted with their care, and you gotta try to show up for them because no one else will. You're the guy playing them, and there's some apocryphal old kind of New York theater story, which I'm sure I'm going to butcher and probably isn't even true in the first place, but it was like, I always sort of reference in my head as a cautionary tale, where it was like these two actors were in a play together, and there was a line where the man asks for a cup of coffee, and for some reason in the context of the play it's a funny line and it gets a big laugh, and so like I guess when it opens it's getting a big laugh, and as the run continues the laughs get smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller, and one day backstage the actor is talking to his co-star and saying, I don't understand what's going on. This line always used to get a laugh when I asked for the coffee. And supposedly his co-star said, well, you used to ask for the coffee and now you ask for the laugh. And I was like, wow, that's like such a bracing thing to hear. And I always think about that. I'm like, don't ask for the laugh. Don't ask for the laugh. Just ask for the coffee. Just do the thing and let other people decide. Because that's the other thing, is when I watch stuff where I can feel someone sort of muscling me into laughing.
Yes.
Even if they're funny, it engenders some sort of defiant, resistant feeling in me where I'm like, leave me alone. I'm going to have my own experience.
Yes.
So you kind of want to leave room for the audience to decide whether or not they think it's funny or what they think is funny. I watch like old, like kind of multi-camera sitcoms where people are punching, like hit jokes.
Yeah.
And I really have admiration for that. I think it's incredible. People who know to do the sort of like setup, punch, the rhythm, the like whole. I cannot do that. It's not that. I mean, it also luckily is not where my tastes align. Like the shows that have been most meaningful to me are not those sort of rhythmic, composed shows usually. But even if they were, I can't. I don't know how. I truly don't know how to do it. And so people talk about like timing. I've always found that to be a kind of like slightly threatening word, because I'm like, I don't know how to think about timing. Like if I'm doing a scene, all I can think about is try to like think about how the character would behave, like sort of like acting 101 stuff, like what do I want? What are the stakes? Listen to the other person, all that stuff. Because if I start thinking about timing, I'll just become this like sort of self-conscious mess. And so that's one thing. I feel like my blind spot comedically covers some things that I'm happy that I'm unable to do. The other thing is I feel really reliant on outside eyes, and I was talking to the editor of Downhill last night, and you really as an actor are so at the mercy of editing and directing. And I think acting in movies or television is so specific in that you're actually not delivering a fully realized performance. You're sort of providing the editor and the director with a variety of shades that they can then use to paint the character in the edit. And so if you don't feel like you have a simpatico sort of taste with the person who's, at the wheel, it's a really uncomfortable feeling, because you can't really, you can assert yourself to an extent, but ultimately they are controlling your performance through the edit, and if you get into some sort of like antagonistic thing where you're trying to force your interpretation in competition with theirs, then neither one of your competitions is going to survive that, and you're just going to be left with this sort of like weird creative carnage. So it's a tricky thing. I think that the time to sort of have those conversations, hopefully, about how you're approaching something is before, so that you can say, "Oh, I don't think I'm your guy," or they can say, "I don't think you're my guy," because once you're there, you have to be able to. I have an acting coach who I work with on everything, and a friend of mine, she's a director, her name's Anya Saffer. And she said something to me once that I thought was, she said a lot of things that I think are so interesting, but one of them was, she said, I think every good production of a play has a religion to it. Meaning like there's a collection of shared values, creative values, sometimes ethical values, but basically there's sort of the agreed upon ethos of the project. That everyone is, the director or someone hangs sort of the North Star in the sky, and everyone can navigate towards that North Star, and we're all pulling together according to these agreed upon mutual values. And I think that's, being part of only religions that you are,
Yeah,
you know.
yeah.
that
It's
you-
hard. It's hard to subscribe to a religion that you don't believe
Yeah,
in.
yeah. I mean, it's very sort of overheated language. If you obviously it's not a literal religion, but that idea of like a code. Every production has its own little code, and that goes from everything to like how are we going to play the comedy to how do we treat the background actors. You know, I mean, it's both the most sort of pragmatic things and then also the sort of hoity-toity stuff too.
And then this leads into like just a feeling on the set then that is conducive to creativity, like, you know what I mean, like safety and all of that. That's all part of how making things happen, I guess. And in that same vein, you have often said like that the Silicon Valley time with those guys was one of your favorite jobs because of how much you love those guys. And I was thinking, is there ever a time when magic can happen and you actually dislike the person in the scene?
That's a really interesting question. I think for me at least there has to be some kind of love, and it doesn't necessarily have to be between the castmates. You could just really love the character or love your castmate's character. But there has to be something that allows you to sort of unlock yourself a little bit so that you're not just self-protective and self-conscious. There has to be something that makes you accessible to yourself. And for me, when there's nothing I love in the room, I turn into a little bit of a hermit crab crawling back into my shell. I think it's hard not to kind of recess when you just feel uncomfortable. I mean, I always hear these old stories about Saturday Night Live and, you know, how competitive it would be and that, you know, and you never know if your job and, you know, and I always think like I could never ever be funny under those circumstances if I just felt like there was a target on my back. Like, how do you, like, because...
And live, too, and it's
that
live.
Too, and the sort of the horse race of it all, like, oh, this person got this many sketches and that person, you know, if you felt... I guess I just feel like, for me, vigilance and humor are sort of mutually exclusive. I don't know how to be hyper-vigilant and even find things funny, let alone be funny under those circumstances. It's sort of, someone told me once that like laughter early on, also probably I'm getting this wrong, but like that monkeys, it was a way of like monkeys conveying to each other that a perceived threat was actually benign. Because it was like this sound that would be like, oh, we thought there was a tiger, or I don't know, do tigers eat monkeys? But we thought there was a tiger. Now there's no tiger, so we're laughing and we all know, okay, it's safe. And I do sort of feel like laughter is, to me, is like, you have to have some sort of safety, I think. I don't know.
Because in other genres, there's a perception that some actors can work well, even under like, can work better under kind of a stressful situation, like I'm thinking of like Shelley Duvall in The Shining.
Yeah, right.
You know, but what you're saying is like that's not comedy. Like that's for a different thing.
I don't know though. I would notice like when I was doing improv shows, I'm now going to contradict myself, but I noticed that the thing that mattered was that I used to think, okay, well, I have to be in a playful mood to do a show. But then sometimes I'd have a fight with a loved one or something bad would happen, and I'd show up and I'd be really angry or I'd be really sad before a show. And often those shows would be some of the better shows. And what I realized is the thing that was the killer was numbness. If I showed up and felt numb, then I couldn't do it. If I showed up and had some sort of intense experience, it was less about the quality of the experience and more almost about the quantity or the voltage of it. So if I had a strong feeling of some kind, I could sort of convert that into scenes. But if I was depressed or I felt kind of, you know, that the sort of Novocaine, someone's Novocaine your personality, that's very hard to be creative when you feel like that. But I also think, I don't know, did you read Sidney Lumet's book about making movies?
Yeah, sure
He
did.
says something in that I think is so great, where he's like, some directors will say, whatever it takes to get the shot, I'll do it. You know, I'll stop at nothing. Sidney Lumet in that book, to his credit, goes, there's stuff I won't do. He's like, there's stuff where if it's required of me, if I have to push this actor in this particular way, or if I have to humiliate this person, I'd rather make a worse movie and not do that.
Wow.
And I think he came to that conclusion because he hit an actress. I think
He does describe that in
right?
there, I think.
Because she couldn't cry, and then he hit her, and then she was so grateful afterwards. But he was like, for me, that felt so horrible. I mean, different times, Jesus. Like, but I think I don't know if she asked him to do that or what happened, but it was something where he was like appropriately felt horrific about it and was like, I'm not doing that.
Yeah.
And I think this like the fantasy of the sort of auteur, the the auteur who will stop at nothing. It's like you don't have to forfeit the fact that you're a human being, I think, in order to make things that are interesting, you know.
I heard you talk about the scene in Downhill where you guys shot it for 3 days, and it's almost like a play. You shot it in its entirety over and over again, I guess.
Yeah.
But when I heard that, I was thinking, there are some actors that probably this is the best way to work. You're doing the scene. It's, you know. But then I was thinking, day 3 of doing it that way. But tell me about that scene.
Okay, so it's a scene in which one couple is sort of having a come apart in front of another couple. They're having this horrific fight in front of one of their work friends and his girlfriend, played by me and Zoe Chow, and we're these sort of deer in headlights as we watch this couple just completely disintegrate in front of us. And it's an 11-page scene, and like you said, it was shot we shot really long takes for 3 days. I found it to be completely exhilarating. I think one of the hard things about television or film is that you spend a lot of energy trying to remember where you are in the story. A lot of it's like, okay, so this just happened. Even in shooting a single scene, you take a break for lunch and you come back and you're like, okay, where was I? Like, you know, so trying to sort of remember the emotional arc takes a lot of concentration, and it can be confusing, and you often get it wrong. And so to just be able to shoot start to finish and sort of take the whole ride on camera was really fun. I also feel like, for me, I will never say no to an extra take. I never get bored. It's like when people talk about like David Fincher, these people where they're like, they did 75 takes. I'm always like, oh my God, sign me up. Like, it just seems so fun.
Great.
For a variety of reasons. One being that like, I never feel like nailed that, got it, you know, so I'll always take another at bat just because I want another shot at it. Yeah. But also because there's an infinite variety of ways in which the scene could go, and each one is going to be distinct and weird, and you're going to figure out a new little wrinkle in it or some weird little moment. I heard an interview with Mike Mills, the director, once where he's talking about Annette Bening, and he was like, Annette Bening goes into every single scene with like a kind of like ferocious curiosity and interest in what that like real unexpected moment will be. You know, that thing that you didn't conceive of. It's not your idea of the scene. It's the scene as it is actually happening. And I always think like, you can see that when you watch Annette Bening. That she didn't come up with how she's going to say her lines and then start saying them. She's so, you know, she's after it. She's looking for that thing that's real, you know? And I feel like you can never have too many shots at that. Yeah.
But you don't get tired, though, of that exploration. You know what I mean? Like, you don't get tired. Like, I can imagine just like you can have that kind of excitement, but the 3 other people, if they're insanely tired, you're still excited because you're exploring and getting new things. Doesn't that drain you?
I mean, well, first of all, one thing that was so nice about that is like they were so generous. I mean, you can really judge an actor, I think, by what they do when they're not on camera. You know, when you're shooting the other person's coverage, how much do you show up for the scene? And those guys were like so full of commitment and energy and, you know, vulnerability, even when the camera wasn't on them.
Cool.
Yeah, it's really good. I remember hearing On the Waterfront that Marlon Brando left.
He left.
during that, you know, I could have been a contender scene. And I was just like, what?
I think it was like they even like said why he left. Like there was like a football game on or something.
Jesus Christ. I mean, like truly one of the greatest scenes in cinema history. But then also it begs the question, is like, well, is acting all just bullshit? Because if he can do that with a tennis ball or whatever he was acting with, it's just like, but anyway, so they were wonderful that way. But I also feel like if you get tired, that's its own version. I don't think, you know, there's an exhausted version, which is probably really interesting in its own way. So I don't think it's about maintaining a certain fever pitch of energy. It's just about sort of taking the ride. And if you feel exhausted, but the other thing I'll say about that is, I think part of my attraction to acting and improvising and all that stuff is I think I was a fairly lonely kid in a lot of ways. Because I think I didn't know, I had a loving family, people were really nice to me, but I think I didn't know how to puncture my presentation of myself in order to connect in a more authentic way with people. And paradoxically, occupying kind of fictional circumstances allowed me to do that more directly. And I think I felt like, especially when I was improvising, it's the least alone I ever felt. I felt like I was connected to the audience, I was connected to the other performers, I was connected to myself, I was connected to the character I was playing, the character they were playing. I had so much company, both fictional and actual. And even like in my daily life, the thing that makes me feel tired is small talk. That's the thing that makes me feel exhausted. It's when you're not connected to something that's actually sort of energizing. And you're just going through the choreography of polite social interaction. That makes me feel fatigued. Being in a scene where you're having this incredibly intense emotional exchange with 3 other people, that to me charges my battery. That at the end of that day, I've got energy because I'm like, oh, I've been kept company, and I've had access to actual human beings and not a sort of water cooler version of them. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Absolutely. And you said something really that I think is important in another interview, which is that you, at a certain point in this kind of hard environment, the Alps, you know, with this with this weather, you felt yourself tense up when you were trying to get a shot, and the time was going away, and there was a cloud coming or something like that, and you thought to yourself, "No, I insist on having fun here." When I heard that, I was like, "That's so." Empowering, I think, for actors to hear that. You know, the idea that like this could be really stressful, especially people that come on and they just have to do one little moment in a scene.
That's the hardest job.
Yeah,
that's the hardest job.
Half a day or whatever, and everyone's trying to move on. The idea of stopping and saying, "No, I'm going to insist on having this be a good time for me." And the idea of like that you can do that, you can actually will yourself into having fun. And then I feel like that will also change the work.
Yeah, I think so. I don't know who said this. It might have been Mark Rylance or someone in an interview, but I thought it was so interesting. They were saying basically like our lives, if you're an actor, your life is the experience of shooting. It's not the final product.
Yeah.
The final product you'll watch maybe for an hour and a half. The experience of making it is your actual life. And when you die, probably what flashes before your eyes is not the footage from the movies you made, but the experiences you had making the movies. And so don't shortchange your actual life in favor of this sort of imaginary product life. And I thought that was pretty wise. And I also think it alienates you from yourself when you feel like when you're so results driven and you're trying to make everyone happy and people please or do a good job or get your next job or whatever. It disconnects you from who you actually are, because you're just trying to sort of hit a target, which is usually a blurry target in the first place. So it's kind of like, I don't know, this is the weirdest metaphor of all time, but I heard some you know, like public intellectual or researcher or something talk about how like adolescent girls often experience their own sort of nascent sexuality in terms of how others see them. And that means that they don't take pleasure in their own experience, because they're watching themselves. They're wondering how they're doing. You know, they're trying to do a good job for the guy. They hope the guy, you know, it's like, and I think it's a recipe for a bad experience across the board. You want to stay in your own. You want to stay aware of your own pleasure in a weird way. It's a very weird metaphor, but you know what I mean. You don't want to fake an orgasm on screen. So
do not do that.
Yeah,
but it's also like that. It's not just that makes your life better. It makes my life better as the audience, because that's just better work. It's going to be done there when you're in the moment, living in it. You know, instead of thinking about the result.
Yeah.
You know, and so that it's better all around.
I think that's true. Anya, that acting coach I won't shut up about, but who has really changed my life, she said something to me once where she's like, your idea of the scene is the enemy of the scene.
Oh,
and I was like, and it's the same Annette Bening thing that I'm talking about, where it's like, if you're trying to hit a mark, if you have an idea about how it goes and you want to be good, you know, you have to murder your expectations so that you can be free enough to have a positive experience, and then you know, whatever, and show up. I don't really, it's very hard. Actors who can prepare on their own, I don't really get it. Like, I feel like I have to do it through conversation.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting.
And she's someone who I trust in the most, like, in every way. And it's lonely. It's scary. Like, acting is lonely and scary. You're like, I don't know. Am I doing this right? So to have her as she said something to me. I was like, I tried directing a little short film, and I was asking her for advice because she's a director. And she said something that I thought was so brilliant. She said, when you're directing, don't try to be smart. Don't be analytical. She was like, watch the scene and have an experience of the scene. And don't need to know what you're going to say to the actors. She's like, after the take is done, walk over to the actors and speak from that experience. Because your experience of the scene will give you energy and intensity that will then infect them. And that is a better way to be. She goes, instead of being an outside eye, try to be an outside heart. And I was like,
so good.
Isn't that brilliant?
That's so
I was
good.
like, and I think like that was so helpful to hear, and also it resonated with me so much because she's been my outside heart for so long.
Yeah.
She as we've struggled through various thickets, she's always been there, sort of with her heart, watching and helping, and I would I'm completely in her debt.
Avenue 5 seems like a really smart show. I only saw one episode. Jumping from like Silicon Valley to this, like does this feel like I'm on another show, I'm going to continue to live? There's not, I don't have to, I might look for other things, but I'm able to live now. I'm able to fulfill myself because I'm working on a show. Is that fulfilling enough, or do you feel like you need to always be constantly searching, even when you're on a show, for other things?
That's a good question. I mean, we just found out today that there's going to be a season 2, and it's funny, I could feel my body kind of like unclench by like 10%, you know? And I have had this sort of improbable good fortune to be on multiple shows in which I find the people and the characters really interesting and really good to be around. So given that, it feels so steadying. And it's also like, just by its nature, like an actor's, career, life, whatever, is erratic and unpredictable, and uncertainty is kind of the price of admission. You're just saying, when you decide to pursue that, you're like, okay, well, so much for any kind of stability or predictability. But television work is about as close as you can get to that, I think. Having okay, so for these 4 or 5 months, I'm going to be working with these people in this location on this project. And it's really, it's a real banister to hold on to. Mm-hmm. I don't think I would want to do it unless it was creatively exciting. In other words, I don't think I would be like, okay, I'm going to just go punch the clock on this show that I don't like in order to sort of soothe myself. Mm-hmm. I don't think I'd take it that far. But luckily, I've been able to have my cake and eat it too, where it's been creatively scary and challenging and exciting. But also I get like a paycheck that then means that when I'm not working, I can be a little bit of a dilettante and just be like, oh, well, I'm sort of interested in writing. I'll try writing something. I'll try directing. It sort of subsidizes your more nascent ambitions. So it's lucky. It's really lucky.
Can you describe the on-set ingredients that are most conducive for you to do your best work? And by this I mean no time constraint, although there's always a time constraint, but that's what I mean by, like, that's an ingredient. Like, there's not a time worry. Maybe it's an independent thing, and I don't know, you're doing it with your friends. I don't imagine.
Yeah, sure.
Total love and trust of the director. Like, some people don't work well if the set is like a party. Some people work better if the set is like a solemn, quiet thing where nobody talks after the take.
Yeah,
like they're not high-fiving. You know what I mean? This is what I'm talking about ingredients. Like, what?
My conditions are high fives after every take, sometimes in the middle of takes.
This take's going on long. Can I get a high five?
Boy, my spirits. That's funny. That's a good question. I think it's a situation in which you don't have to feel embarrassed about being enthusiastic. I think when there's a collective passion and you don't feel shy about giving it your all, that is a dream come true. I always hated, just conversationally, that phrase, cool story, bro. People say that, or TMI. I always hated those.
Yeah.
I'm like, go to hell. Cool story, bro. It's people should try telling their stories. Or when TMI, it's I always want TMI. I want to hear the thing, your actual life. I don't want to hear. So that kind of standoffishness, which I think connects to what you were talking about before about winking about the character, sort of keeping yourself at a remove so that you're supposedly safe, I think is a recipe for disaster. And I think creating an environment in which we can, everyone on the set can feel like a kid who's, where you're playing cops and robbers or whatever, and you can just lose yourself in that and have so much fun. I think that to me is the thing that really makes a difference. And I think, I don't know, once again, Anya told me this thing about this, I forget who it was. There was some director in Eastern Europe where all these actors would come and be directed by him, and they would give the best performances of their career, just transcendently beautiful performances. And someone went to a bunch of these actors and were like, what was it about that director? How did he get that out of you? And apparently they all said it was the quality of his attention, that the way he looked at you was with such fondness and curiosity, not kind of obsequiousness or Hollywood, whatever, blowing smoke, but an actual sort of human enthusiasm for whatever, and fascination and love for them. And I think if that can exist sort of omnidirectionally, if the actors feel that about each other, if the director feels that about the actors, blah, 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 that everyone's sort of curious and fond of each other. There was a kind of highfalutin thing that they would teach you in improv class, but it was something it's embarrassing to say, but they would say if you treat your scene partners like geniuses and poets, and they will become geniuses and poets, And I mean, I cringe to say it, but I also happen to agree with it. Expectations determine results to a large extent. I'm blabbing, but this is the last thing I'll say, which is I heard that there was this study about rats, and they took normal rats and split them into two bins, and one bin they labeled smart rats, highly intelligent rats, and the other was just rats. And then they would have people come in, and they would have them place these rats in a maze. And there was nothing distinguishing about the intelligent rats. They were just labeled that way.
Yeah.
And evidently, the rats that had been labeled intelligent finished the race faster because the way people would pick them up and put them in the maze, somehow, whatever, calmed them down or was gentler or something.
This is crazy.
And so those rats actually outperformed the other quote-unquote normal rats, even though they were all normal rats.
Yeah.
And I think that a director can treat you like an intelligent rat. And that's a good thing, you know?
A quote from you. The work will always be there for you, even if employment isn't. That's you. You said that.
I said that.
You said that. If the employment goes away, there will always be work. I think it's like that's a really important thing, because what I want as an audience member is people expanding their craft and not expanding their career. Because I think that the craft, you expand your craft, the career will come.
Right, or not, but either way.
Yeah. Something is going to happen.
Yeah, right.
But the energy is the energy placed in the craft, in the work, and which is always just take a class. You can always just get together with people, right? Is this kind of what you were trying to say?
Yeah, I'm
there?
slightly embarrassed by my own kind of like. Always hearing yourself quoted back to you, you're like, oh God, what a grandiose win back. But I do believe. I don't know, there's a David, I guess I talk mostly on just things that I've read someplace else, but there is a David Foster Wallace thing where he talks about, like, everybody worships something. I guess we're getting back to religion stuff, but he says, and the compelling reason for choosing God or Yahweh or Jesus Christ is because if you worship almost anything else, it will eat you alive. He goes, if you worship beauty, it's going to be an earthquake when the wrinkles start to show, and they're going to you'll die 1,000 deaths before they finally grieve you. You know, if you worship fame, you'll never feel famous enough. If you worship money, you'll always feel poor. If basically, that there are so few things that actually nourish you. So you have to be really careful about, and also the messaging we get in a culture that thrives on advertising, and if you're not careful, the stuff that's just in the water is not going to be good for you. You know what I mean? You walk down a street, there's 100 billboards telling you that you're a loser unless you buy this thing. You know what I mean?
Yes.
There's 1,000 songs on the radio about, like, how if you don't have money, you're a prick. Yeah. There's so many messages that are disorienting. And so I think if you can't find the little patch of grass to stand on, it can make you pretty dizzy and pretty sick. And so for me, again, it's almost like the comedic timing thing. It's like, I don't actually know how. If I wanted to be careerist, I wouldn't know how.
This is your actual quote about that. I don't have the capacity to understand the ecosystem of Hollywood enough to manipulate it.
Yeah, I don't.
That was you. Isn't that great?
What a windbag. This guy won't shut up. This is Zach Wood's character. I don't know. How could you ever know? I mean, it's so fickle. I mean, who's to say? I don't know.
Well, is there though a point where your people come to you and say, Zach, you're about at the base of this next mountain. Man, you got to strap on the boots now. You got to strap on the Hollywood manipulation boots, okay? Because otherwise you're gonna be, you're fine. You're fine. You're in it. You're in the circle. You're in the circles. But there's a hill now that you're ready for. Get the boots on. Got to play the game now. You've been avoiding this. I don't even know what this even means, but I'm sure that they are. This is the way they talk, I think, to certain people. Like, whatever this means.
Needle. That's the phrase that I hear, that you sometimes hear from people. It's like, does this move the needle?
Yeah, yeah.
And it's like, I don't know. What does move the needle? Move the needle where? Like, I think I luckily have representation that really has my back. And they're very patient with me in a certain way. But they're always sort of farming these opportunities for me. And it's not like people are banging down my door to have me be in things. I have to audition for stuff. I have to pursue stuff. And so they'll be like, what about this? What about that? And often I'll just say, oh, I don't want to. And then rather than becoming sort of discouraged or disincentivized, they just are like, okay, well, what about this? They keep, I never get that sort of arm twisty thing where it's like, well, this will really move the needle. Because I think they know I think they're really good at their jobs and they're not trying to sort of coerce me into doing something that I wouldn't be good at anyway. And I think that's a relief.
Yeah.
I also think that's connected to the TV thing. In other words, having an income allows you to be a little bit of a more precious Polly about what you choose to do or not do. I think if you have kids or an aging parent or a mortgage or, and you're not working, then you have to take a job, or figure out something else to do. So, and the other thing that's scary is once you've abandoned your own tastes, then
That's bad.
It's really scary because then you're like completely subject to the approval or disapproval of these gatekeepers.
Yes.
And a lot of the gatekeepers, that was a realization for me where it's like, they're just folks. They're just other people who don't know.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
It's not like they know more.
Yeah, they're just other people. I remember hearing some story that like Steven Spielberg like walked onto a studio lot and like found a vacant office and set up there when he was like young and starting out, and then we like have meetings and people would come to the office and be like, well, there's an office at Paramount or whatever, so he must know what he's doing. And I think that's so ingenious. It's like, right, you get an office and a necktie and people think you know what's up, and you don't, but you just fake it. And so you can't believe the offices, you can't believe the neckties too much, or you'll start to lose track of what you like. Yeah.
Yes.
And this is the other thing, and this might sound a little whatever windbaggy as well, but like to any actor who is listening, especially like a young actor who hasn't been employed or is struggling, I think it's a completely valid thing, obviously, to consider practicalities and be like, I can't do this because I need money. Fine, I get it. But and I think that's a reasonable decision. But the thing I would encourage, especially if there's like young actors who are struggling, don't you dare let a business dictate your creative worth to you. It is not for a marketplace to determine how valid your contribution is. You have value, and whether or not it's a capital value or not doesn't determine whether or not you actually have value. And so I think that's really hard to remember when you're getting rejections. I mean, when I first had an agent, I went for a year and a half of auditions, never got a call back. Got these calls from like some casting agent, called we had a general meeting just like this, we were just shooting the shit. Called my agent, was like, I don't get it, he's charmless, all this stuff. You just get these things and you just start to think like, maybe I'm not good. And it may be that you won't make a living. It may be that there's financial hardship. Those things may be real, but what is not real is those people don't get to tell you how valid you are as someone who is curious and creative and passionate.
Zach Woods, thank you so much.
Thank you, man. That was really fun.
Back to One is a production of Filmmaker Magazine, which is a publication of IFP, the Independent Filmmaker Project. Listen to back episodes of this podcast at filmmakermagazine.com or wherever you get your podcasts.